You wake up to the smell of fresh maize cakes and lake water drifting through an open window. Canoes glide past on canals below you. Somewhere nearby, a market is already roaring to life with over 60,000 people trading feathers, cacao, obsidian blades, and cotton cloth. Vendors call out prices. Priests move through the crowd in dark robes. Children run along the causeways that connect the city to the mainland. This is not a myth. This is an ordinary Tuesday in Tenochtitlan. For nearly 2 centuries, this was one of the largest, most organized cities on the planet, larger than Paris, larger than London, a floating metropolis built on an island in the middle of a lake, connected by causeways, fed by a genius system of floating gardens called chinampas, and governed by an empire that stretched across most of central Mexico. And then, in less than 2 years, it was gone. Not weakened, not diminished, gone, its emperor dead, its temples burned, its population collapsed by staggering numbers. How does an empire this vast, this wealthy, this militarily dominant, fall apart faster than most modern political crises even unfold? The story you were probably taught is simple: Spanish steel beat Aztec obsidian, guns beat spears, superior technology won. But historians who have spent decades studying the primary Nahuatl language sources tell a very different story, one that has almost nothing to do with swords. Start with the numbers, because they set the stage for everything that follows. When Hernan Cortes landed on the coast in 1519, he brought roughly 500 soldiers. 500, the Aztec Empire, by contrast, could call up armies of tens of thousands within days. Tenochtitlan alone housed a population somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 people. On paper, this was not a fair fight. It should not have even been close. Before you get to the answer, it helps to understand what the empire actually looked like from the inside, because it was never as monolithic as the word empire suggests. At the center sat Tenochtitlan, ruled by an emperor who claimed descent from the gods and commanded absolute authority over ritual, warfare, and taxation. Around it stretched dozens of smaller kingdoms, each with its own ruler, its own language, and its own grievances, bound to the capital not by shared identity but by tribute payments and the threat of military punishment. Every year, caravans of goods flowed toward Tenochtitlan: cotton, cacao, gold, feathers, jade, and captives destined for religious ceremonies at the Templo. That river of wealth is what made the city so dazzling to the first Spanish soldiers who saw it. It is also what made so many of the empire's subjects quietly furious. So what actually happened? Historian Camilla Townsend, who reconstructed much of this period directly from Nahuatl accounts written by the Aztecs' own descendants, argues that the empire was never a single unified nation the way European chroniclers described it. It was a tightly controlled network of city-states, held together through tribute, marriage alliances, and fear. Cities that fell under Aztec control were expected to send goods, labor, and sometimes captives back to Tenochtitlan every year. Many of those city-states hated their Aztec rulers. The Tlaxcalans, one of the largest independent nations bordering the empire, had been fighting the Aztecs for generations, refusing to bow to Tenochtitlan's tribute demands even as it cost them dearly. When Cortes arrived, the Tlaxcalans didn't see an invader, they saw an opportunity. This is the part the old story leaves out. The army that eventually surrounded Tenochtitlan was not 500 Spaniards, it was tens of thousands of indigenous soldiers, mostly Tlaxcalan, fighting alongside a small number of Spanish troops to settle their own long-standing war. The fall of the Aztec Empire was, in large part, an indigenous civil war that the Spanish inserted themselves into at exactly the right moment. But alliances alone don't explain how a city of hundreds of thousands of people collapsed so completely. For that, you need to look at something almost invisible in the historical record, something researchers only fully connected centuries later. In 1520, as tensions boiled over between the Spanish and the Aztecs inside Tenochtitlan itself, a disease arrived that no one in the Americas had ever encountered: smallpox. It moved through the population with terrifying speed, because unlike the Spanish, indigenous peoples across the Americas had no prior exposure and no inherited immunity built up over generations. Epidemiologist Rodolfo Acuña-Soto has spent years studying Mexican colonial records of this period, and his research suggests something staggering. Within the first year alone, smallpox may have killed a significant portion of Tenochtitlan's population, including the Emperor Cuitlahuac himself, who had only just taken the throne after his predecessor's death. Entire households died together, sometimes within days of one another. Survivors described bodies stacked in the streets faster than they could be buried. and homes falling silent one after another across entire neighborhoods. Excavations at the Templo Mayor, the great ceremonial center at the heart of the city, have confirmed a period of extreme social disruption matching exactly this window of time, layers of abrupt change and ritual deposits and construction that align with mass death rather than gradual decline. Think about what that means. This wasn't a battle, this was a population losing its leadership, its army, and its labor force simultaneously. In a matter of months, from an enemy no weapon could fight, farmers who tended the chinampas died before the harvest, warriors who might have defended the causeways died in their sleep, even the empire's chain of command kept breaking, because each new leader who rose to replace the last one had a chance of dying from the very same disease within weeks. So picture the final siege. In the spring of 1521, the city that had once fed hundreds of thousands from its floating gardens is now cut off, its causeways are blockaded, its freshwater aqueduct has been destroyed, forcing survivors to drink brackish lake water. Inside, survivors of the epidemic are weakened, starving, and grieving. Outside, tens of thousands of Tlaxcalan and allied warriors, working alongside a small Spanish force, tighten the siege day by day, moving building by building. Through the city's canals, the fighting lasts nearly 3 months. Contemporary accounts describe the lake itself turning the color of the fighting within it, and streets choked with rubble as house after house was pulled down to deny defenders any cover. When it finally ends, the last Aztec emperor, Cuauhtémoc, is captured trying to escape by canoe, and the city that had stood for nearly 200 years falls silent. Here is the counterintuitive twist historians keep returning to. The fall of the Aztec Empire is often told as a story about a primitive civilization losing to a modern one, but that framing gets it backwards. Tenochtitlan's downfall wasn't a failure of technology or intelligence, it was the direct consequence of the empire's greatest strength, its vast interconnected network of trade, tribute, and political control, becoming the very channel through which disease and rebellion could spread. Fastest, the more connected and centralized a system is, the faster it can collapse once its core is compromised. This is not a story about weakness, it's a story about how tightly wound systems fail all at once instead of slowly. And that idea should feel uncomfortably familiar. Look at how modern institutions, economies, and even social networks are built today, deeply interconnected, highly centralized, efficient in calm times, and devastatingly fragile the moment multiple pressures hit simultaneously. A financial system doesn't fail because of one bad decision, it fails because interconnected weaknesses compound at once, the way disease, war, and leadership collapse did in Tenochtitlan in 1520 and 1521. The pattern is not unique to the 16th century, it's a pattern in how complex systems, ancient or modern, actually break. Supply chains, power grids, entire economies, all of them can look unbreakable for decades and then unravel within weeks once enough pressures land at the same time. There's something else worth sitting with. The people of Tenochtitlan were not passive victims waiting to be conquered. They built one of the most sophisticated cities of their time, engineered floating farmland that outproduced European agriculture per acre, developed a written language and a complex calendar system, and fought a fierce, coordinated defense of their capital for months against overwhelming combined forces. Their empire didn't fall because they were behind, it fell because of a catastrophic, compounding sequence of political fracture and biological disaster that almost no civilization on Earth, in any era, could have withstood intact. Historian Matthew Restall, who has spent his career pushing back against the old conquest narrative, points out that Spanish accounts written decades later tend to exaggerate the role of a handful of Spanish soldiers while erasing the tens of thousands of indigenous allies who did most of the fighting and dying. The version of the story that survived in European textbooks for 500 years was, in many ways, written by the smallest group involved. It also matters who wrote down what happened afterward, and who didn't get the chance. Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagun later worked directly with Nahua survivors and scribes to record their own testimony of the conquest and the epidemic, producing one of the only major sources written from inside the collapsing city rather than from outside it. Those accounts describe not just death, but the disorientation of watching a functioning civilization lose its structure within a single year. Markets going quiet, temples standing empty, entire calendars of ritual life interrupted because there was no one left healthy enough to perform them. So the next time you hear the fall of an empire reduced to a single sentence, a story of simple conquest, remember what was actually happening on the ground, remember the alliances forged out of decades of resentment, Remember the disease that outran every army, killing faster than any weapon in human history up to that point. Remember a population burying more of its own people in a single year than most wars claim in a decade. You woke up this morning to something ordinary, an alarm, a phone, a routine so stable you never think to question whether it will still be there tomorrow. For the people of Tenochtitlan, waking up used to feel exactly the same way, until, in less than 2 years, it didn't.